Because, well, he's the freaking producer. It's a fact of life. We get old, things change, and we move on. Of course, these things have to happen. It'd be unnatural if they didn't. But every once in a while, we get to extend our youth, or at least vicariously live through the experience of others. And that's where the Interrupters come in. Follow along with me. I'm sure it'll make sense eventually. Now, normally on this channel, I discuss musical events from the early aughts. Thus, the name, the punk aughts. Please subscribe. But this week, I'm going to do the unthinkable and actually talk about a band that formed after the conclusion of the George W. Bush administration. The reason why they fit into this channel is that for myself, and I'm sure many, many others, the Interrupters are a link to the past and an access point to the present. But who are they? As I record this, the Interrupters have just premiered their full-length concert movie, This Is My Family. And depending on its availability, I definitely recommend giving it a view. It's only about an hour long, the band sounds really, really good in it, and it gives some extra details to the story of the Interrupters. A little more detail that I'm probably going to give here. This is going to be more of like a Wikipedia version of the history of the band.
Dude, that's not a normal state. That's lazy, okay?
As the story goes, in 2009, while on tour with Sugar Ray, singer-songwriter Amy Allen began writing music with guitarist Kevin Bavana of the Telecasters. Now, this music was originally to be part of Allen's next solo record. However, after bringing in Kevin's younger twin brothers Justin and Jesse on bass and drums respectively, they decided to ditch the solo record and form a band. So, just to recap, without Sugar Ray, the Interrupters would not exist. Thank you, Mark McGrath. Also, this isn't really relevant to their music, but as of right now, Amy and Kevin are actually married. So this band features 3 brothers, 2 of whom are twins, and the one member of the band that isn't biologically related to the other members just happens to be married to the guitarist. They are not lying when they say, "This is my family."
Welcome to the family!
Of course, you can't really talk about the Interrupters without mentioning another figure that always looms large in the Interrupters universe. Not only were Amy and Kevin support acts for Sugar Ray, they also had a link to none other than the legend Tim Armstrong. Since the mid-2000s, Kevin has been a touring guitarist for the Transplants, and beyond that, Kevin and his brothers have worked with Tim on several projects. And for her part, Amy had also been working with Armstrong in anticipation of her upcoming solo album. That album actually never came to fruition. What did go down, though, is shortly after they formed an official band, Tim Armstrong signed them to his own Hellcat Records. Since then, they've released 3 successful LPs, with their most recent release, Fight the Good Fight, finding relatively large success. They also had a pretty well-received cover of Billie Eilish's Bad Guy, and they've been on many, many major tours. So that's who they are, but how do we describe their sound? They take great pride in being one of the most successful ska bands of the past several years. And I think ska punk is probably a pretty good classification for them. And as I mentioned earlier, they're really embedded into the Hellcat Records tradition. They're really less Real Big Fish and a lot more in the vein of maybe the Slackers. If I were to Frankenstein their sound, I'd say it's like if Operation Ivy formed in the 2010s, but instead of being fronted by Jess Michaels, they had Brody Dalle or Joan Jett singing, with a vocal cadence that's kind of reminiscent of 2000s Tim Armstrong. Sounds really similar. Now that's a very simplistic description of their music, and it probably undersells their natural pop sensibilities. That's another thing we'll get to a little later on. So I mentioned Armstrong earlier, and this is probably as good a time as any to get into the elephant that's kind of always in the room with the Interrupters. Any discussion of the band inevitably sees someone crashing a comment section with allegations that the Interruptions are not really an authentic band. This is obviously because of their very close association with Tim Armstrong. But people seem to take this as more than a relationship between producer and band. They seem to think that Tim Armstrong is like this puppet master, and the Interrupters are 4 marionettes just hanging on some strings. Well, he pulls all of them, which is hilarious. Now, I can kind of understand why people arrive at this conclusion. Like I said, they sound very much like a band that Tim would have created. However, this gets weaponized in a pretty lame way. Let's face it, the fact that they're fronted by a female lead singer definitely plays into this charge being leveled at them so often. Recently, the Punk Rock MBA did a pretty good video on women in rock. To expand on that topic, go ahead and check out his video, but it's definitely relevant to what I'm talking about here. And again, I have no doubt that Tim plays a major role in crafting their music and crafting their sound because, well, he's the freaking producer. I mean, don't you think Brett Gurewitz plays a pivotal role in shaping the sound of Rancid? Obviously he does. It'd be ridiculous if he didn't. And it'd be ridiculous if Tim didn't play a role in shaping the sound of the Interrupters. But don't use that to discredit them. They're not exactly Milli Vanilli out here. And yeah, they fit into the lineage, kind of the third generation after Op Ivy and Rancid. The next mutation, so to speak, is the Interrupters. But why is that a bad thing? Actually, that brings me back to my original point of extended youth. The Interrupters being associated so closely with Rancid, that's not a bug. That's an absolute feature. The Interrupters do have the sound of a bygone era. And that's why they resonate so deeply with me. As much as we love these older bands, they're not going to be eternal. Eventually, there has to be a new generation. And it's funny, because a lot of modern punk bands would cite Rancid as a major influence. But so few actually sound like them. We can't lament the fact that some of this music doesn't get its due, but then complain when a modern pop artist borrows so heavily from these same bands. And depending on how their careers progress, I think the Interrupters can serve a function that several pop punk bands have actually served in the past. If Blink-182 can be an entry point into a band like The Descendants, then there's no reason that the Interrupters can't be an entry point not only to the broader world of punk rock, but also to the classic two-tone ska bands. And I could tell you anecdotally, I've seen this happen. So for some context, my elementary-age daughter really loves the Interrupters. I'm sure she was initially attracted to them because they were one of the few bands that her dad would listen to that had a female-fronted lead singer. But it's gone deeper than that. It has led her to discover other great bands. Bands like Rancid, Operation Ivy, Real Big Fish, The Bosstones, Goldfinger, Less Than Jake, Save Ferris, and even The Specials. Now my situation is a little bit different. My daughter would have probably been exposed to these bands regardless. But now she has a contemporary band to get into, a contemporary pop artist to lead her to those bands. And it's not just because they are a female-fronted band. It's because they have really, really good music. And their music, it takes me back to that theme again of eternal youth. As most of you probably know by watching this channel, Rancid is the one band in the world that brings out emotions in me like no other band really can. I think it's their departure from the traditional nihilism of punk rock and the offering of optimism against all odds. That's what really appeals to me about them. And over the years, I never really thought I'd find another band that evokes those same emotions. That was until I discovered the Interrupters. I think it's so awesome that so many of the ska bands use the black and white contrast as an illustration of who they are, and I think it really fits the Interrupters in a very special way. Their sound, it's upbeat and energetic, the type of music that makes you want to move your body. But then you listen to the lyrics, and they have a pretty broad spectrum, from the very dark to the uplifting and inspirational. And it's that inspirational piece that really puts them over the top. And best of all, it's all happening right now. Not in the 70s, not in the 80s, not in the 90s, not even in my beloved 2000s. It is happening right now. No, we can't be immortal, and things are gonna change as life goes on. But I'm glad that the Interrupters exist to make sure the best part of our past lives can absolutely live on. Talk to you next time.